Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. We are going through Dao De Jing. It's been amazing, the discussion, going back and forth. This is like oral hermeneutics of people starting with their translations and then discussing it. So it's been amazing. And we are up to number 14. So as always, we'll start by people reading their favorite translations of number 14. Go ahead and type exclamation mark. So folks, those of you who are new, what we'll do is I will read the translations, and then we are going to talk about the piece itself. Okay. So it's going to be Joe followed by Judith. Joe, go ahead.
Sure. That which cannot be seen is called invisible. That which cannot be heard is called inaudible. That which cannot be held is called intangible. These three cannot be defined. Therefore, they are merged as one. Each of these three is subtle for description. By intuition, you can see it, hear it, and feel it. Then the unseen, unheard, and untouched are present as one. Its rising brings no dawn, its setting no darkness. It goes on and on, unnameable, returning into nothingness. Approach it, and there is no beginning. Follow it, and there is no end. You cannot know it, but you can be it. At ease in your own life, discovering how things have always been brings one into harmony with the way.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Next up is Judith, followed by Evanique. Judith.
Yep, I'm reading the Stephen Mitchell translation. It's always interesting to me. Like, I always wonder, like, what if I'm getting the translator's ideas? Well, I am, but, it's their interpretation to a certain degree, the way they translate it. So it's interesting. All right, so this is what Stephen Mitchell saw in the words. Look, and it can't be seen. Listen, and it can't be heard. Reach, and it can't be grasped. Above, it isn't bright. Below, it isn't dark. Seamless, unnameable. It returns to the realm of nothing. Form that includes all forms. Image without an image. Subtle, beyond all conception. Approach it, and there is no beginning. Follow it, and there is no end. You can't know it, but you can be it, at ease in your own life. Just realize where you come from. This is the essence of wisdom.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Judith. Next up is Evanique, followed by Brian. Evanique.
So this comes from the Tao of Christ, a Christian version of the Dao De Jing. We look for it, but cannot see it, so we call it invisible. We listen for it, but cannot hear it, so we call it inaudible. We try to grasp it, but cannot hold it, so we call it non-material. We cannot describe it, so we call it oneness. It is neither high nor low, bright nor dark. It is unceasing, unnameable, neither something or nothing. It is the form of the formless, the image of the invisible, impermanent and ineffable. It is without beginning and without end. When we know the Spirit directs our paths. To know as we are known is the beginning of wisdom.
Thank you, Evanique. Next up is Brian, followed by Krishna. Brian.
Okay, for this one, I've gone back to the D.C. Lau translation, interpretation. What cannot be seen is called evanescent. What cannot be heard is called rarefied. What cannot be touched is called minute. These three cannot be fathomed, and so they are confused and looked upon as one. Its upper part is not dazzling. Its lower part is not obscure. Dimly visible, it cannot be named, and returns to that which is without substance. This is called the shape that has no shape, the image that is without substance. This is called indistinct and shadowy. Go up to it, and you will not see its head. Follow behind it, and you will not see its rear. Hold fast to the way of antiquity, in order to keep in control the realm of today. The ability to know the beginning of antiquity is called the thread running through the way.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Next up is Krishna, followed by David. Krishna.
Hi. Ursula Le Guin titles this Celebrating Mystery. Look at it, nothing to see. Call it colorless. Listen to it, nothing to hear. Call it soundless. Reach for it, nothing to hold. Call it intangible. Triply undifferentiated emerges into oneness. Not bright above, not dark below. Never, oh never, can it be named. It reverts, it returns to unbeing. Call it the form of the unformed, the image of no image. Call it unthinkable thought. Face it, no face. Follow it, no end. Holding fast to the old way, we can live in the present. Mindful of the ancient beginnings, we hold the thread of the Tao.
Wonderful. Thank you, Krishna. Thank you. Next up is David.
Yes, so this is Harold Ould's version. That object upon which you gaze, yet do not see, is called the invisible. That sound to which you listen, but do not hear, is called the inaudible. That thing for which your hand gropes, yet fails to touch, is called the intangible. The scrutiny of these three imponderables cannot be carried further. The mind perceives them blend in one. This unity seen from above does not shine, nor seen from below is it dark. It goes back through time in an unbroken chain of countless links till it reaches non-existence. It is the formless form, the image of the unimaginable. It is the inscrutable. Advance towards it, and it shows no front. Follow it, and it shows no front. Follow it, and it shows no back. Yet by laying hold of this ancient truth, you can master your present existence. For to understand the mystery of the beginning is to hold the key to the Tao.
Wonderful. Thank you, David. Thanks. Jason, are you ready with yours?
Yes, yeah. So can I share my screen? Yeah.
Please.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, again, same thing. That's Amang and I work together on this one, and then I know because we since we are become more serious, so some point Amang and I have some disagree. So Amang, you are here, so if some place you are not 100% agree, please mention it. There's no way to say that's the one thing. So I like to say this one. I hear different interpretation. My view is this one is talking about the cosmogony. Okay, the beginning of the universe. Okay, so that's the idea. So they introduce three keywords: 以, 息, 为. Okay, so basically talk about what we look at but cannot see is called colorless. That's 以. They introduce a new word. Okay, what we listen but cannot hear is called soundless. They call 息, and we have a different way to translate. I don't think that's important. And what we reach for but cannot hold is called formless. That's a way or intangible, something like this. So the key is here. These three are indistinguishable, so we call them as one. So they talk about the beginning of the universe, and then they talk about its upper side is not bright, its lower side is not dim. Its continuous movement are unmeasurable, and it returned to a state of nothingness. So to this point, okay, he was going to introduce another new word called vagueness. So that's this word, 恍惚, okay? So this stateless state and this imageless phenomena is called the vagueness. So that's another new word. So here, Lao Tzu introduced 4 new words, okay? One is colorless, soundless, formless, and 恍惚, which means vagueness, to describe the beginning of the universe. And then he's going to talk about more about the beginning of the universe. He say, we cannot see its front when we confront it, nor can we see its back when we follow it. Okay. So I think up to this point, everybody's translation are almost the same. But the later part, I'm going to make a little bit different, and I have my own reason. Most of translation is put this sentence and this sentence together, and then put this sentence and this sentence as like 2 pairs. But I don't think that makes sense. Okay, the reason is according to the language, they have the verb here and the verb. So these 2 actually they are matched. So my translation will be by applying the primeval Tao. Okay, remember we talk about the beginning of the universe. Then that's also the primeval, the beginning of Tao. If we apply this one, what we can do? We can harness the present reality, and we can know its primeval origin. Okay, and then let's draw a conclusion, which is this is the essence of the Tao. So that's the whole logic. Okay, on this one. I think that makes sense. Basically, it's introduce a few words, describe the beginning of the universe. Then he talked about the Tao at the beginning, also like this. And applying this Tao, the primeval Tao, and you can harness the present reality and know the primeval origin. Okay, then this is the essence of Tao. So the whole structure, I believe, it should be this way. And then, and if we continue on the next section, you will see they have a little bit continuity from this chapter to the next chapter. So thank you. That's the.
Thank you, Jason. All right, so now it's time to talk about what we got. What was our impressions of this particular poem, particular chapter? Aman, go ahead.
Yeah, I first wanted to say thank you to Jason for sharing that chapter. I really like how he finished it. And I'm very touched that you added in parentheses my suggestions, not necessarily corrections. It wasn't so much, I think, disagreement as it was just different ways of interpreting. But I was very pleased to see that retained there. Because when I read back over our correspondence, it wasn't so much that I saw or felt anything was wrong with Jason's translation. I was just offering a terser way of expressing it that kind of has the meter of the original as well. So especially in those first 3 stanzas. So I just wanted to say, yes, thank you. And no, I don't think we disagree at all. In fact, I agree with you about the last 2 sentences being more tightly linked. And as I said before, I will defer on your expertise on this matter.
Thank you. Thank you, Aman. Next up is Evanique, Phil, and Joe. Evanique.
Yeah, this one really, I think when I read this one, AF15, I really connected with the Bible on this one. And it's especially the 3rd paragraph. It is without beginning and without ending. When we know the Spirit directs our path. To know as we are known is the beginning of wisdom. And I always think of that as the Holy Spirit, because in the Bible, it's when Jesus goes up to heaven, when he's resurrected and he goes up to heaven, he tells his disciples that he's leaving them with the Holy Spirit. And it's not something that you can see. It's not something you can hear. And then it talks about being the beginning and the ending. And in the Bible, it talks about God being the Alpha and Omega, which is the beginning and the ending. So I think for me, this was really like the connection where I could see the Bible and the Tao coming together and like forming a cohesive thought. Like it's a cohesive thought of God. And I think across religions, no matter what you believe, everybody believes that God is the beginning and the end, the Alpha and the Omega, no matter what religion you practice, that the Tao goes to the heart of that. So, and even like the first paragraph where it talks about we look for it, but we can't see it. And I think that's that's the thing. Like everybody's looking for something. Like we are looking for an answer. We're looking for something to explain this life, this world that we live in. And so we look for it and we can't see it. But when we're not looking for it, I think that's when we find it. And I think that's because God, like there's a spirit within us. And it's if you go within, you find it. And I think if you're looking for something outside of yourself, that's where you go wrong. Just like you're looking for something in the material world. And as we studied in flow, the universe is not here for us. So I think you have to go inward and find that for yourself. Whether you call it God, whether you call it consciousness or whatever, you have to go inside to find the true meaning.
I think that was wonderful. That was wonderful. I think you captured something very deep there, that the Holy Spirit as kind of the conduit between Alpha and Omega. It's like that's the kind of the flowing part. But whenever people are trying to see things, they're actually trying to look for manifestations. Whereas what this whole thing is pointing towards is the process that is running through it, that is running through everything. And I think Holy Spirit, I think captures that beautifully. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up is Phil. Let's see, Phil, Joe, and Madeline. Phil.
I want to thank Jason for his bringing the idea up, because if I had any criticism of Lao Tzu, is that I felt that he didn't have enough compassion for the human need to understand. Okay, he left it to the Tao, and you can't understand it anyway, just whatever, and even worse if you try to put it into civilization in a governmental form. However, this explains it better because it tells you that the Tao is mysterious. It may be eternal, don't know, but our understanding at best is mutable. And that you should not be fixated on the mutability of our understanding as somehow capturing the eternal essence of what the Tao is. So by that token, not only is he allowing a kind of understanding to seep in, but he is allowing for the existence of a limited and temporal being to at least have some grasp of the eternal being, of the big being itself. But I think by the same token, he's almost saying, this really goes partly back to Nietzsche, and I don't want to, because I have problems with Nietzsche, is that because of this mutability, because things change as we change, our understanding change, in a sense, what has to happen is that you have to understand to let your temporality pass, and that you can only grasp things in a sense in the cultural hero of poetry, which gives you a hint of what something might be, but it doesn't say exactly what it is. So therefore, you're not left isolated. You just can't understand anything whatsoever, right? You could just have to trust in the mystery of the Tao. This kind of as a kind of act of compassion to at least shine a light on the limitation of human beings and give, in a sense, a stained glass window to the reality. Not the reality itself, but a stained glass window to the reality. And so therefore, in a sense, you have some relationship to that reality, even though it's not the real thing. And maybe in 1,000 years, you have to change the stained glass window to something else, or maybe even next year, that sort of thing. So poetry does that. It does not freeze anything for eternity, because you could never capture eternity. So this is an act of compassion in a very strange way. And actually, for many years, the poets were within government. They just were not the emperors, right? They influenced the emperor.
Thank you, Phil. I see a profound compassion that Lao Tzu has for people trying to understand. What I see him saying is that you have the ability of having intuitive grasp. Your intuition can kind of feel what the Tao is, what nature is, and you have to trust it and be open to that. Moment you try to use names, you're trying to capture manifestations, kind of temporary manifestations of things. So you're going away from that. So it is, I think that's what he's talking about. And I see this profound compassion in the sense that he's saying that you can actually feel it, you can actually intuit it, and that's always accessible to you. It's only when you fall in love with the names that you have created and things that you're working with, and forget the persistent things underlying them, which you have an intuitive grasp of. That's when you go wrong. So that's how I see it. Next up is going to be Joe, followed by Madeline. Joe.
Yeah, I mean, this is the one disadvantage of going third and not first, is that so many great things have already been said. I see this as just not relying solely on our sense data and what we see and what we observe. It's in a way, it brings together both the physical and the metaphysical to be one. And that's where we need to look beyond what we can just see and notice. And this is important because I think that there's a lot to be said here with things like, even when you're talking about something like intuition, when you don't necessarily see something, but you feel it. And so I also get the idea of a beginning and end as well, the alpha and omega, and is very similar to what Evanik had noticed as well. If you want to call it God or not, but I see this as a very important poem as well, because in today's world in particular, we've become so put a name to everything, or so empirical, that thinking at least beyond what we can see and quantify is something that has been lost. And so to me, it's relevant to today's world as well. And we need to just consider what isn't there. So I think it just really moves beyond the human senses and moves into the metaphysical. And really, that's the oneness that you're kind of talking about, is that when you're both, and ultimately you're looking within. That's another important part of this as well. So those are just my comments.
Thank you. I just want to read out from like a equivalent version from the Indian tradition. This is from Rabindranath Tagore's Gitanjali. Okay. I know not how thou singest, my master. I ever listen in silent amazement. The light of thy music illuminates the world. The life breath of thy music runs from sky to sky. The holy stream of thy music breaks through all stony obstacles and rushes on. My heart longs to join in thy song, but vainly struggles for a voice. I would speak, but speech breaks not into song, and I cry out baffled. Ah, thou hast made my heart captive in the endless meshes of thy music, my master. So this is the Indian take on the Tao. Next up is going to be Madeline, followed by Jason. Madeline.
Yes, thank you, Jason and Aman. It's a wonderful translation. My translation follows it fairly closely. And once again, I'm struck by, especially in this one, how the orientations of our own world as human beings within our own bodies are used to convey the ineffable. So I'm just going to read some of the key words from my translation. If you look down your lines, it starts with look, listen, grasp. These are all things we do in the world. From above, it is not bright, so we're looking at something. And again, from below, it is not dark, we're looking. Stand before it, so stand, follow it, stay with it, move with the present. So it's actually quite a physical poem in the sense that it orients our bodies towards it, while at the same time telling us that our orientations aren't going to yield any results.
Thank you, Madeline. Next up is Jason, followed by Phil. Jason.
Yeah, I think that's great. I hear from Madeline and from Joe, and the basics. Madeline talk about like we should forget of our orientation, and Joe also talk about not by our sense, right? The point talk about see, hear, touch. That's our basic sense to understand it. So this chapter tells us we should give up, okay, our conventional way to understand either the sensor, our sense organ, or by sense organ, or by our orientation. There's no top, no down, no front, no back. So that's all talking about. Then to manage today's issue, to understand the primordial situation. So everything, not only you can understand everything's origin, and you also can deal with today's work. This is the essence of Tao. I think that's the whole paragraph is, and it's follow my, well, put this way, my idea. Okay, I will say that Taoism or the Dao De Jing is very logical. They follow certain pattern. They tell you something, either a common song or common understanding or nature world or the universe, then give you a lesson at the end. Usually it's political. Okay, that's the way I structure. I understand everything. I know not everybody agree, but that's the way I'm going to look at from now on. So we will see, it's work or not work. And doing this one, I cannot stop to talk about one word. Okay, because here I hear most of the translation talk about stateless state and the formless form. Okay, my translation is stateless state, imageless phenomena. Okay, and I'm so happy I make this translation because that's almost word-to-word translation, stateless state and the imageless phenomena. And the reason I want to call phenomena, I don't see any English translator, they use the word phenomena, because I think that word exactly match as our English word phenomena. The reason is that word in Chinese is elephant. Okay, so elephant is phenomena. Okay, you think about in southern China, there's no elephant. but they have the people travel south to Thailand, this area. They probably see elephant. So when they come back, they will say, "Oh, they have the huge long-nosed elephant animal we call xiang, which is elephant." So after 1,000 years, 100 years, this word elephant become phenomenon. So that's exactly the meaning of phenomena. So that's why may not be very important, but I feel so happy I find this word because it's an imageless phenomena. Basically, exactly the Chinese word to word translation. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Amon, Krishna, Laura, and Phil. Amon.
I'm finding this interesting. One thing that's running through my head as I've been listening to people talk about, and particularly Phil, when you were talking about how this seems to illuminate so much. So much of this chapter is in the negative, in the things that can't be seen, can't be grasped, can't be understood, but it feels very true. And it got me thinking of Nancy Cartwright, who I'm not sure if any of you are necessarily familiar with or not. She wrote a book that was titled How the Laws of Physics Lie. And her primary point was a critique of the utility of science, and that science has been approaching two conflicting goals in its pursuits and its endeavors. One is to explain, and the other is to unveil truths. And her fundamental point in that book is that these two goals are in stark contrast with another. The more explanatory science becomes, the less truth it necessarily reveals, and vice versa. When it tries to say that something is true, more often than not, it will have to hedge its bets and say, except not in this case, but not when we talk. So it always is in this dynamic tension. And she points out that we actually experience a greater sense of truth at, she uses an example of going to a theater and feeling that we have experienced something that speaks to the truth of the human condition. In the same way, I think Lao Tzu, with this particular chapter, does a masterful job in giving us an experience of truth that is devoid of explanation, but we feel like something has been explained, even though all the explanations are in negative, what you cannot see, what you cannot touch, what you cannot feel, what you cannot follow, what you cannot confront. So those were just some of my thoughts as you guys were talking about this. That is another facet of this chapter.
Thank you, Amon. Next up is Krishna, Laura, and Phil. Krishna.
Hi, I just wanted to bring up an observation I made. The first part of the poem mentions 3 senses. And of course, there are 5 that are well known. And the ones that he uses are seeing, hearing, and touch, leaving out taste and smell. So what is the difference, and why concentrate on those 3 senses and leave out the other 2 senses? The only thing I can think of is the ones he uses are sort of dimensional. You can see where things are in space. You can hear things in space. You can feel where things are, and you can locate them in space. But smelling things, it's multidimensional. It's not a point in a 3-dimensional space.
Great observation. Jason, what do you think?
Oh yeah, I just want to respond this one. I thought about this, but in traditional, it's also happened in Eastern Asia and Western, right? We consider our sight and the hearing as a divine sense, okay? And the smelling and the taste, it's kind of like animal level, Okay, so I think that's the tradition for some reason. Okay, it's coincident from the Western philosophy and the Eastern philosophy. Okay, that's a coincidence I find out. And I also think about why you talk about touch. Okay, I think this touch probably if you translate as a grasp. So the words is very subtle. Same as English, we can translate as we try to grasp, but ungraspable. So in another way, that also means physical touch. It means try to understand, but not understandable. So I think that's the reason they left out the smelling and the taste, And they also put in today's science, we don't say 5 senses, right? I think I read some article talk about like 9 senses, including our position, upside down. So luckily, I don't know, or smartly, okay, Lao Tzu also covered this one, right? Remember what the Madeline talked about, you have to not only forget about your senses, you also forget about your orientation, okay? Up, down, left, right, in, out, you also forget about this. So I think that's my explanation, yeah.
Wonderful, thank you, Jason, appreciate that. Laura, what did you think of this chapter?
I thought it was beautiful, first of all. And I think for me, it's basically saying that, things can come and go, the universe, it can also disappear. But in the end, everything, it remains unchanged. And that in that sort of, there's an endlessness to procreation, which is kind of always the same also. And that's basically what the law of the Tao says.
Wonderful, thank you, Laura. Next up is going to be Brian, followed by Phil. Brian.
This comment, I think, reveals kind of a predilection of mine, that when we talk about the origin, we're interested in the origin because it still has a force in today's life. And that's been reflected in all the translations we've read. It's in the present tense. And what Shrikant read was the present tense. It's a force that's in the present life today. So when I read this, I see pointing to the origin as some validation of what is the force in effect today. If you want to understand the force in effect today, think back to what was in effect back then. It has some permanence, and it might be easier to grasp in those simpler times. I would like to have Jason's comment. The Japanese word here, does it clearly mean source, or clearly mean origin, or could it mean both?
What words? I'm sorry.
In the Chinese, is there the word that is used to point back to the origin? Could it also mean source, the present source or force?
No, at least my understanding, no. Okay, especially in this chapter, they use the word shi. Okay, so they use the word called shi. Shi means the beginning. I don't see, at least my understanding, I don't see the meaning of the source or something. That means my original translation is a primordial. Okay, so that's I'm thinking. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jason. Next up is Phil, followed by Judith. Phil.
This actually follows who am I thinking about now? Amon's comment to a certain degree. Since I'm an artist and I know quite a bit about art, I'll take this opportunity to explain something that's important and that's related to this. Cubism happened at a very important moment. What it did was to show the inner structure of something that's beyond the surface structure of something. But it was also simultaneous dealing with the fact that at this moment in our history, we are so trapped by language itself that it had to deconstruct the language to form another language. And so as a result, what Cubism did was open up this language that it could be manifested in all sorts of understandings, because it manifested a multi-dimensional aspect of form, in a sense. And so what happened in the modernist movement was that when they exposed this language, which is different from a descriptive language that presume that it is identical to the truth, it created a language that was so broken up that it simultaneously told you that it was a language, but it was also a lie. You cannot believe this language because it's stitched together in such a synthetic way that it is itself exposing itself on the one hand as revealing a new dimensionality of what is possible for experience, but also saying this is all after all make-believe and a lie in itself by have the juxtaposition of itself. For instance, in theater, you know, when the stage manager comes on and introduce and start talking about the play before the play happens, he's exposing another structure that tell you that this whole play is already interpreted before you do it. So in a sense, it's dealing with a more complex relationship to how language is in relationship to a representation. And that is a very important factor, that it is actually telling you something, but it's saying this is a lie. Don't take it as a manifestation of the real. It's only a manifestation that points to something else. So that's kind of interesting. It really deals with not only the problem of language, but the particular problem we have at this moment that we believe so much in language as a representation. I always use the word representation rather than representation.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Phil. Marshall McLuhan makes a very interesting point in his commentary on art. He says great artists actually show you alternate reality. What they're trying to do is that everybody is thinking a certain way, and they are trying to actually shake you up a little bit by showing you something from a different perspective. And if they are actually great, they are actually showing you something which is missed by the specific manifestations of words and concepts or visuals that are being currently used. Next up is going to be Judith, Kevin, and Sun. Judith.
I don't really know what I want to say. I would want to touch on what Brian was saying because it struck me too. He talked about, you know, the source, the beginnings, and that's really why I felt like this is the first time, unless maybe I'm missing something, that instead of just showing us to look at things in one direction and then another direction, we're actually told, be mindful of the ancient beginnings or realize where you come from. And this is the essence of wisdom. And so like, we're supposed to know what that is, to be mindful of it, or, you know, that it seems to be something that we're supposed to be aware of in order to have wisdom. So what is that? What is that ancient beginning that he's pointing at? Anyway, that's all.
Excellent, excellent. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to read about 5 translations of the last paragraph. Because the point that Brian made and point that you're making, I think is critical, because that's where this entire chapter culminates on. So I'm going to just read 5 of them. First one, stay with the ancient Tao, move with the present. Knowing the ancient beginning is the essence of the Tao. Just realize where you come from. This is the essence of wisdom. wield the Dao of the ancients to manage the existence of today. One can know the ancient beginning. It is called the Dao Axiom. When we grasp the Tao of the ancient ones, we can use it to direct our life today. To know the ancient origin of Tao, that is the beginning of wisdom. Next up is Kevin, followed by Sun. Kevin.
Thank you. I would name this chapter called The Discipline of Dao. This is the last two letters, actually. I shared one on the Kojax. It's close, the meaning. It's record historical. And I would say it's all be called norms, laws, rules, all applied use this similar word. That's if they say plus Dao, it's called Dao Ji, would it be called discipline of Dao? So that's going to summarize of this chapter. From let's see 3 cents, and eventually you come to oneness, and we like overall I would say Dao is try stay on neutral. Don't let's see going down, you see it's too dark. No, if it's going up, it's too bright. No, it's stay neutral. You will find closer truth. And from inside, find the happiness, joyful, rather than in the outside. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Next up is Jason, followed by Sun. Jason.
Yes, thank you, Kevin. You know, actually, just by I think we are thinking about the same things. When I do translation, I think about exactly the same thing. The last word, how to translate, and then I think Shrintan just read the 5 different translations. Some talk about the beginning, some talk about the axiom, and some talk about essence of Tao. And I use the essence of Tao because I've been struggled many times. And by that words, they call Ji. Okay, I think Kevin also posts on the words on that. The Ji means Chinese long time ago already know how to do the silk, use the silkworm to thread. So the Ji means the thread. Okay, so you think about the thread. Why talk about thread? Thread basically means, so I think it's also have a translation called the thread of Tao. That's a word by word translation. But here, probably not means the beginning. Okay, you can say it's beginning because you pull out the thread. You can say, oh, that's the original. But more like a guideline, just like Kevin said, the probably in today's sense is discipline. So if you connect with the context, you talk about applying the primal Tao, okay, the original Tao, you can harness today's reality. You can understand the origin, right? So he talked about the application. So discipline is not a bad translation, probably the right translation, but essence, also another subtle way to talk about. So I've been struggling with these 2 words. I should call the discipline of Tao or essence of Tao. But basically, that's the reason. So
wonderful. Thank you, Jason. I'm going to read Ursula Le Guin's translation of the last paragraph. Holding fast to the old way, we can live in the present. Mindful of the ancient beginnings, we hold the thread of the Tao. Next up is going to be Amon, followed by Sun. Amon.
Yeah, I wanted to share not the actual translation that I'm looking at right here, but Edmund Ryden wrote a really good scholastic piece, but the commentary that he has on this chapter and this discussion of this last character, Zhi, I thought was kind of germane to this very short commentary where he says, quote, "In this chapter, the image of the way as starlight, the Milky Way, and as a woven cloth constantly intertwined, The later image is present in the idea of winding and twisting. And the final reference to the beginning of the way, where the word for beginning refers to the head end of a thread. The image of light is clear from the translation itself. His interpretation is that there is something almost transcendent in the choice of this zhi as essence or era or discipline, and it ties with sort of that spooling out cosmic order that you can look up to the heavens and see in action. So just one more sort of layer to add on to this cake. Thank you all.
Thank you, Amon. Next up is Sun. Sun, go ahead.
Hi. While everybody was talking, this one number 14 keep remind me of one of the sutra of Buddhism, the Parajna Paramita, so-called the Heart Sutra. The whole page is 270 something words. Keep talking about what is not wisdom. I see the similarity between this and then that. So it's not because it's talking about what is not. It doesn't mean it is negative. It is trying to eliminate what is not, so that it's kindly eliminating during the process. It will try to point into right wisdom that it's asking us to see. Another thing came on to my mind is the Beginner's Mind by, there's a book written by Zen monk. It's the way how I understand it is beginning is when nothing is added, no colors, no ear, when free from five senses and free from time and space, and that's purely organic state. I think that's the beginning. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sun. I think even in the Western tradition, when people are trying to describe God, there is a lot of the way in which it is done by saying it's not that, it's not that, it's not that. So that's there is a tradition of doing that. Thank you. And so this is like Buddhism, which comes from Indian tradition. Then you got the Chinese tradition with Lao Tzu, and then you got the Western religious tradition as well, doing similar things of using negative to kind of clear way for being able to experience God. Thank you. Next up is Joe.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really, thank you, Sun, for bringing that up, the concept of Soshin, where, you kind of have this beginner's mind and how you're observing things. And I kind of, that's something that had not come up to me in the past. But if you're talking about not using your senses and, just kind of blindly looking into something, or not blindly, but almost just suspending all kinds of judgment, that's essentially, a beginner's mind. And I hadn't thought of that. That's all anything I wanted to say. Thank you for that. So.
Thank you, Joe. All right, so let's move on to number 15. Let's see, go ahead and type exclamation mark if you would like to read your translation. Go ahead. So we're going to start with Joe, Evanik, Joe followed by Evanik. Joe, go ahead.
The ancient masters were profound and subtle. Their wisdom was unfathomable. There is no way to describe it. One can only describe them vaguely by their appearance. Watchful, like men crossing a winter stream, alert, like men aware of danger, simple, uncarved wood, hollow like caves, yielding like ice about to melt, amorphous like muddy water. But the muddiest water clears as it is still, stilled. And out of that stillness, life arises. He who keeps the Tao does not want to be full, be precisely because he is never full. He can remain like a hidden sprout and does not rush to early ripening.
Thank you, Joe. Next up is Evanique, Judith, and David. Evanique.
In ancient days, those who were born again were not like those who claim that label now. Their wisdom was subtle and profound. They comprehended mysteries beyond human knowledge or description. They walked the earth gently, like a person crossing a frozen stream. They were aware of their surroundings, like a soldier in enemy territory. They were as considerate as a guest, and permanent as a melting icicle, unpretentious as uncut wood, open as a valley, opaque as muddy water. How does one make muddy water clear? Be still, and the water will clear in time. How does one become still? Let everything happen, and stillness appears. Those who practice this ancient way are not full of themselves. Not full of themselves, they appear ordinary to others, but they alone are complete.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Evanique. Next up is Judith, followed by David. Judith.
The ancient masters were profound and subtle. Their wisdom was unfathomable. There is no way to describe it. All we can describe is their appearance. They were careful as someone crossing an iced over stream, alert as a warrior in enemy territory, courteous as a guest, fluid as melting ice, shapeable as a block of wood, receptive as a valley, clear as a glass of water. Do you have the patience to wait till your mud settles and the water is clear? Can you remain unmoving till the right action arises by itself? The master doesn't seek fulfillment. Not seeking, not expecting, she is present and can welcome all things.
Wonderful. Thank you, Judith. Next up is David.
Thanks. This is, again, Harold Gould. There's some typos in this, so some of this doesn't seem correct, but I'll just read it as it is in the version. The wise men of old were skilled in the mysteries. Their minds were subtle and penetrating, and so profound that they were scarcely to be understood. Trying to understand them, this is the picture I call up. They were cautious, like those who cross a river in winter. They were reserved, like those who are suspicious of their fellows. Their behavior was modest and seemly, like that of one paying a formal visit. They were yielding, like ice responding to the heat of the sun. They were simple, like a piece of wood before it is carved. Yet they were open to receive, like a valley between hills. Yet they seemed to some of us obscure, like a muddy stream. How shall water become clear? By keeping still. It is by the still and the motionless that life is quickened. Those who follow the Tao do not crave replenishment. Always satisfied but never satiated, they are ever renewed.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, David. Next up is Krishna.
Hi, this is Ursula Le Guin again. She calls this chapter 15, People of Power. Once upon a time, people who knew the way were subtle, spiritual, mysterious, penetrating, unfathomable. Since they're inexplicable, I can only say what they seemed like. Cautious, oh yes, as if wading through a winter river. Alert, as if afraid of neighbors, polite and quiet like house guests, elusive like melting ice, blank like uncut wood, empty like valleys, mysterious, oh yes, they were like troubled water. Who can, by stillness, little by little, make what is troubled grow clear? Who can by movement, little by little, make that is still grow quick? To follow the way is not to need fulfillment. Unfulfilled, one may live on, needing no renewal. Now,
Wonderful.
not always does she leave a commentary, but in this poem she does. So if I can read the commentary.
Please.
In the first stanza, we see the followers of the way in ancient times, or illo tempore, remote and inaccessible. But in the second stanza, it brings them close and alive in a series of marvelous similes. I am particularly fond of the polite and quiet house guest, of the images of the valley and of uncut or uncarved wood, which will occur again and again.
Thank you, Krishna. Jason, you're next.
Yeah, okay. This one is, I think, is very challenging, and there's a reason. Okay, I think if you pay attention, the end almost give, sometimes you will see opposite. Okay, there's many reasons. Okay, just bear with me. Let me read my translation. Okay, first sentence: the genuine Dao practitioner is ungraceful, unpredictable, mystery, omniscient. His Dao is indiscernible. Okay, so this one is a little bit, I just translate this 4 word, word by word. The reason I don't want just translate like so deep, something, because that's each word has been used in the whole Dao De Jing many times. So I want to make sure they still keep. Remember this word, the first word, that's ungraceful, that's on the previous section. So I want to keep, since they use this word, I want to keep at least the related meaning on that. Untouchable, ungraceful, incorporeal, that's the reason. Another thing I'd like to mention is in the Chinese tradition, when they say the old, use this word, the old master, the old Dharma, that means the original, the best, the good one. So the genuine one. So most of translators just take old, but in the Confucius tradition, Taoism tradition, whenever we talk about old, that means the good. So then, but we can know the indiscernible by the following observation. So the word is appearance, operation, because you cannot know it, you can understand. But remember, they have the 7. And if you pay attention, that's 7 different levels, from the easiest one to the most difficult one to understand. So the first is prudent as if wading through a stream in winter. I think most translations do the same thing. And the second thing is vigilant as if fearing surrounding neighbors. Okay. So I like to ever pay attention on the as if part, not on the first word. Okay, the first word can have many translations, and the second part is very visual. You can try to imagine what we are talking about. The third one is dignified, as if paying a formal visit. Most of translation do as guest, okay? But I think Chinese sense of guest is different than American sense of guest. Because in American, when you go to, for example, if you visit my house, you may bring 2 wine and wear a shirt and just come and say, hi, Jason. But in Chinese tradition, being a guest is dignified. You have to be courteous, serious, like you pay formal visit to your boss. Okay, so I think that should be the attitude when you do the observation. And the number 4 is I use the word, okay, unwound like melting ice, kind of relaxed or unbounded. Number 5 is important, uncuffed block. Okay, this word has been used through the entire Dao De Jing many times, so it's simply nature, like an uncuffed block. Vast, like a body. The last one, indistinguishable, like muddy water. This one is very challenging. I think It means non-judgmental. Okay, you don't judge people or something. It will if you have to relate it to the Zhuangzi chapter 2, talk about everything is equal. Okay, this kind of concept. Okay, so then again, it's Lao Tzu is doing the same thing again. Tell you the the ancient Tao master and they give you how to observe it. Then Lao Tzu is going to give you some practical, political advice on this one. You will say, ask 2 questions. Okay, remember, one is talking about from rest, another one is move. These 2 are objects. So who can rest in the muddy world and slowly cleanse? We talk about how to use it. Okay, who can move peacefully through the world and still grow? Okay, they talk about today's life. Okay, how to use this one? You will say those who hold this Tao never desire fullness. Okay, because remember at the beginning we talk about the bowl of water. You should not be 100% full, right? You should have little space. Okay, that's the concept. Because they never desire fullness, they can preserve without being without being reformed. Okay, so I think that's this sentence. If we pay attention, you will see. If I highlight this one, because the different version they have the different word. Some use bu, that means no, and sometimes use this word that means end. So these opposites, totally opposite meaning. One is no, without. Another one is with. So which one it means? So that's the challenge part. And finally, I want to put some picture on there. Remember, you should like wading the stream in the winter like this. Okay, be a guest like this. Okay, this kind of guest, not like a relaxed kind of guest. Because uncarved block is like this kind of wood, simple and nature. And if it's a valley, okay, it's like Grand Canyon. This kind, that's the thing Lao Tzu is talking about. Melting ice, blur muddy water, surrounded, vigilant or alert, like just like Israel, right? Surrounded by the hostile neighbor. Okay, that's the attitude he's talking about. Okay, so that's kind of this translation, a little bit complicated, but at least myself, I think my translation make everything the structure logically. Okay, so I would say I'm happy with my translation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. All right, so folks, now what did you get from this chapter? Go ahead and type exclamation mark if you'd like to share what you got from this chapter. Joe. Joe, you've muted.
Sorry, I don't know what happened there. Yeah, for this particular one, when I was reading it, I mean, I got the impression that that wisdom comes with age is the first thing that kind of struck out to me, is that they're, the ancient masters had this wisdom about them, and that I also get the impression when I was reading this and just trying to think it through, that there's a degree of tranquility that they have in their minds. When men cross Lake Winter Stream, alert like men aware of danger, but they seem to be unshaken in each one of these passages. I also get the idea that there's a sense of contentment, that they're but the muddiest water clears as it is stilled, and it is stilled, and out of that stillness life arises. Again, that comes back to the idea of being tranquil. The other thing is he who keeps it down does not want to be full, but precisely because he is never full, he can remain like a hidden sprout and does not rush to early ripening. And I see that as not necessarily pursuing happiness, or not necessarily it being more like water and essentially going with the flow, as opposed to essentially pushing things. And the two main things I'd say are the ancient masters, and then there's a degree of tranquility. Those are the two things that I'm taking away. But Jason's presentation actually gave me a lot to think about.
Thank you, Joe. Next up is Evanik, followed by Phil. Evanik.
Yeah, when I read this chapter, I oddly thought of patience. And I think because throughout this passage, you see, like the first line, the sages of old were scholars who knew well the way of subtlety, mystery, and discernment. That all requires patience. And not going to read through all of it, but it's like Jason said, you would read the last word. So on the next line is comprehension, and appearance. And I just think like all of that takes patience. And they were always growing like the puddle from a melting cube of ice. If you notice a melting cube of ice, it takes a long time. And for me, that's like, it's like getting rid of what we think we are and to going into who we actually are. But I think Joe brought up a good point about the flow. I always notice that like there's just a flow with the Tao, and Lao Tzu always talks about water and flowing, and even the melting cube of ice turns into that water that again will flow. And then and in the next paragraph he talks about they were open to infinite possibilities like a turbulent storm. So again, that storm is like water flowing, even though it's rough. And then like being patient through that, because once you're patient through that, you find peace in the calm that follows. And so I think this whole chapter just sums up one word is patience for me.
Wonderful. I really like that observation. Thank you. Next up is Phil.
Yeah, I'm going to be a little contrary in this one. First of all, I could do without the second part of advice, itemization of the advices, but I'm going to be contrary in the first part because we usually think of wisdom as the old who has a lot of experience. I actually think it's exactly the opposite. Wisdom comes from the beginning of the child who is always filled with mystery because he's always incomplete in his understanding. So therefore, there's always room for the transformation of more information, because as you get old, it fills up with a certain understanding that crowds out the not only the mystery, but the emptiness that allows new possibilities to flow in. So I think of the ancients in a funny way as the beginning of the child who is yet empty and therefore waiting to be filled, trying to understand. And because of that natural emptiness, it's transforming itself and flowing through all sorts of possibilities that allow it to unfold itself. So it's a very contrary interpretation, but I personally think that inspires me. Let me put it that way. I think that's what he's getting at, is to never grow old, always allow yourself to not know enough, because what you know is essentially the hardening of a kind of personal brainwashing that freezes the understanding, so it's not open to new possibilities, because your understanding at best, because you're not the eternal unknowable Tao, is at best open to these unfoldings that comes. So that's a very contrary interpretation.
Thank you, Phil. Next up is Amon.
Actually, I don't think Phil was contrarian at all. I think you actually just made the Taoist argument. The funny thing is Jason talks about this idea of what the ancient, the best is in the past, and that being a sort of presuppositional foundation of Chinese culture as a whole. And it was especially prevalent amongst Confucians who revered the sages of old. There's almost this two-step that Lao Tzu does here, where he uses their terminology, the ancients, the wisdom of the ancients, but he goes so further back than the sage kings or, the Duke of Zhou or some recognizable historical figure that the Confucians might point to. And he points to this primordial ancients that are so unfathomable, so ununderstandable, that as he describes their character, you are left with this impression of this open, childlike potentiality. That's the uncarved block. That is that melting cube of ice. These things that are as yet undefined and inviting the mystery of the world to come upon them and forge their impressions based on that and not on some ancient scholars, treatise. So in many ways, I don't think your contrarianness is as contrarian as the contrarianness that is baked right into what you pulled out of it.
Wonderful. I agree, Amon. Next up is going to be Jason. Jason, go ahead.
Yeah, let me share my screen for a while. I just kind of respond to what the Phil talked about. I think it's not just same as Amon already talked about. It's not contrary. Actually, probably you get the essence of the Tao. I talk about Phil. So if you look at the 7 lessons, okay, you can see as the 7 observation. But another way to look at it is the 7 lessons. Okay, you can listen from easy to difficult. Okay, the first one like prudent. Okay. And vigilant, dignified, and unwarned, which means relaxed, unbounded, simple in nature, okay, vast, indistinguishable, okay. That's from easy to difficult. But you look at the child, okay, I think the last one is the more child nature, right? It become the prudent, become vigilant. That's the adult nature. That's come with experience. So actually, the essence of Tao is you probably very serious, but actually you are relaxed. Just remind me that I just remember when I do the swimming training, the coach always asks me to feel like uncomfortably uncomfortable. Okay, that's the word he constantly say. Do the endurance sport. You want you to feel comfortably uncomfortable. So I think that's the idea, here. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Amon, you wanted to add something?
Oh, no, I simply didn't lower my hand, but okay. I very much think that sort of, try not to try sort of advice is as Taoistic as it can be.
Yes, I also fully agree that, Phil, though trying very hard to be contrarian, is not contrarian at all. And I think it's the same concept of it's always kind of coming back to the child. So it's like sage seems to be a child. I also want to connect it up with the meetup that Phil missed of long childhood, which is the ideal that Jacob Branowski talks about as being the ideal of the West, of having a mind which is curious and remains curious throughout your life. And I think the sage has that quality. There was in the initial, some of the earlier ones, Franklin made a very interesting point, is what is the, there is a similarity between the child and the sage. What is the difference? And the point he was making was that a sage grows in ability of dealing with the world while remaining a child. So he's able to handle many, 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 many things that the world throws at him while continuing to remain a child. Next up is going to be Judith and Brian. Judith.
Yeah, I agree with what everyone was saying, actually. There didn't seem to be any contradictions to me. And I also wanted to say that I like Jason's last couple lines translations. I don't have them in front of me at the moment, but I like them. The word that came to mind for me was like self-awareness. So a child wouldn't be possibly cautiously crossing a stream or very alert in enemy territory. But so those are the aspects that make us adults when we can be self-aware of to still remain receptive, just be conscious about how we make ourselves available to new ideas, being receptive as a valley. We don't have to be receptive like a child without even thinking that we are receptive. We can be actively receptive. So that's how I was able to tie those two thoughts together.
Wonderful. Thank you, Judith. Next up is going to be Brian.
To me, it strikes me when I read this before, and again now, the two verses 14 and 15 are both, they talk about the Tao, or the Dao. The Dao is, in 14 is the Dao in the world. What is the nature of the Dao in the world? And the 15 is the nature of the Dao in the sage. So in the clever person, or the right thinking or right person. And the thing that comes to my mind is then that it is the last word that we were that Kevin commented on in section 14, discipline, because he did try to draw a whoever wrote the 14 drew a lesson from Tao in the world, and that is that we should approach the world using the Tao discipline. So this 15 is explaining, to my mind, explaining a bit, what is that discipline? What does that look like in the sage? Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. As we have a little bit of time today, so I want to step back and I want to open it up for any questions that anybody has. So we will just first put all the questions down and then we will try to answer all of them. So just go ahead, and if you have questions, go ahead and type an exclamation mark or raise your hand in Zoom. And we will do a version of the lightning round of questions so that any question about anything on the Dao you can bring up at this point. Phil, what's your question?
Well, it's not a question. I wanted to make the comment on my statement. The reason why I was drawn to it was that it seems to me a child is always asking questions because he or she already know she's empty, rather than having answers. They have very few answers. Maybe by the time they're, like 8 or 9, they have some answers, but they're always curious. That's what drew me to it. It was difficult for me to translate the rest of it, but that really drew me to the emptiness of things. So that's all I want to say at the moment.
Thank you, Phil. All right, so folks, now it's time for questions. You can, any question about Dao De Jing or, the Dao or Taoism in general is fair game. So Joe, go ahead.
I would like to know if it's changed anybody's life thus far.
Okay, very good. So first question is, has this reading of Dao De Jing changed your life? Anybody else? Go ahead, folks. This is your chance to ask questions. Hugo. Hugo followed by Joe.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Shrikant. My question is, the chapter 15 really struck me, in terms of stillness. and been thinking about meditation to achieve the, tranquility and the harmony, and get off the hamster wheel that, we're currently living in the modern world. My question is how to really incorporate the teachings of Dao De Jing with meditation.
Okay, very good. How to incorporate the teachings of Dao De Jing using meditation. Very good. Joe.
My question's not actually a very good one. It was just going to be, does anybody have a translation that they prefer if they could share? But anyway, that's, I don't know if that's a worthwhile question.
Okay, thank you. Next up is Kevin. Kevin, what's your question?
My question, what's the best word to describe it though?
Okay, very good.
Thank you.
Other
than the Dao self. We know Dao is a speaker himself.
Okay, what's the best word to describe Dao? Okay, next up, let's see, Katie, go ahead. Can you go ahead, ask your question?
Sure. It's not, I haven't fully thought it through, but I'm thinking of the Bible as using a lot of stories to teach lessons. And I'm kind of wondering, like, how would people describe Tao Te Ching? Is it ideals? Is it, how would you describe?
Wonderful. So Bible has stories. How would you describe Dao De Jing? What does it have? Excellent. Phil.
Well, how would you explain the Tao to a world that's filled with people that want answers? Is it just through Zen koans? So, I mean, is that the only way you can explain it?
Wonderful. So how do you explain Tao to a world that wants only answers? Excellent. All right. So we got lots of interesting questions. Let's go ahead and raise them one by one. Let me see, which one shall we do? Okay, first one, let's take the most extreme one. What's a word to describe the Tao? Anybody with an answer? Jason, you have a question or an answer?
Well, I'd like to answer this, Kevin's question. I have been promote the translation other than Dao. I like to call it the logos. Okay, so I think it's very, very similar. And I would like to quote the Bible. Which one? In John 1:1, right? At the beginning, there's a logo, and there's a God. The God is logo. Okay, it's a word, right? Okay, the English version is at the beginning, there's a word. The word is God, the God is word, something like this. And the original from the Greek version is logos. And if you look at the Chinese translation, okay, Chinese Bible, you use at the beginning, there's the Dao, and the Dao is God, the God is Dao. So that has been the smart people. I think the Chinese translation, they must get the smartest of the smartest Chinese people to translate. So I believe if you have to translate, logos probably the best one. So.
Thank you, Jason. Aman, what's your answer?
Well, I think it was as much marketing as it was genius on their part. They could have chosen to go with Ming as a translation, since they were working with mostly English-speaking scholars, but they wanted a loaded term within the Chinese lexicon, and they landed on Dao as the one that they felt would have the most similar sort of parallelism. As far as a single word to capture the idea of Dao, path, way, those are adequate, but they don't grasp the depth and breadth of what is meant with a character like Dao. If you actually look at the character, there's a few different components of it, and one of them is a head, one of them is a flowing river, and you're left with this sort of impression of someone looking at the flow of a river and trying to decide on a path forward, on a way to go. And so there's deep symbolism within that character that is meant to be plumbed and understood deeper and deeper as somebody looks at it. And so a single word translation doesn't quite capture it all. I responded to Kevin that the expression "not yet done" might catch a lot of it, but I don't think I don't think that's adequate either or sufficient for everything the Tao can mean.
Okay, Phil, what's your answer? Let's try to keep it short so we can get through all these five.
I'm going to keep it short. If you have to reduce the one word, I would say the unspeakable.
Wonderful. Next up is going to be Brian, followed by Jason. Brian.
The Force, as referenced by Jedi warriors.
Thank you, Jason.
Yeah, I just want to continue to promote I'm talking about as a logo. Okay, if in the first chapter, you read as the Tao could be spoken, it's not real Tao. The name can be named, it's not real name. But in the original Chinese, should be Tao cannot be Tao, it's not real Tao. Okay, so if you convert the Tao to logo, you will say the true logo cannot be logalized, which means reason or something is not true logo. So that's my reason. Of course, I prefer to keep the original word Tao, but if you have to force me to use one word, I still think the logo is probably the best.
For me, my answer is that I take Lao Tzu's advice and not try to name the Tao. I think that's the most effective way.
But Kevin forced us to translate, so that's his problem.
Yes. So so that's why I think the short form of using Tao, which is not an English word, is like it's like an X to me. So that's how I handle it. Next up is going to be Joe, followed by Kevin. Joe.
Now you're making me self-conscious by saying not to put a name to it, because I actually agree with that. But if I had one word, I like the word flow. Personally, so I think it represents water as well, and there's a certain softness to it and adaptability.
Okay, I'll give another version of it. I like to draw it. I like it in visual form. I think it's much better to capture it visually. Next up is going to be Kevin.
I actually like Joe's flow, has to be dynamic. Tao is always on the way. If it directly is a path or way, the direct translation. However, obviously on the way, on the path. So never firm the honest. That's also, if this way translation also explains the Tao, you can explain Tao. However, it's not eternal Tao. So
thank you. Next up is Krishna.
I like the word recycle. You probably have noticed my background. The background has psyche above arrow, or arrows above psyche, right? So recycle is the psyche surrounded by the real, R-E, psyche, A-L. So it's my name of my poetry group. So in a way, memes or poems or all these ways, how do you say it? Undifferentiated, indirect ways of getting at things, new ways of getting at things.
Thank you, Krishna. Next up is Evanique.
Yeah, I like Kevin's answer the way. And interestingly enough, in the Bible, the followers of Christ were, that movement was called the Way in the Bible, and the people of the Way were executed. So I think of the Way as a guideline to how to live your life. So I actually like the Way.
Wonderful. Next up is going to be Phil, followed by Amon. Phil.
Well, your ex inspired me to say that if it could be written rather than spoken, it would be empty brackets.
Wonderful. Amon.
I actually think I agree with Phil quite closely. I like a lot of what's said, but one thing I think that's significant, I actually wrote a paper about this, is that Dao De Jing, that's very intentional with those first two terms, Dao and De. Dao has a connotation of not yet embarked upon necessarily, not yet in action. It's this open potentiality. It's very yin, very quintessence, whereas De is a much more observable yang phenomena. And so another way of actually interpreting Dao De Jing would be the yin yang classic, and Dao being the more yin of the two is an empty bracket waiting for completion.
Wonderful. Let's go to the next question. This is a question, the question is, Bible is full of stories and parables. If you wanted to describe what Dao De Jing is, how would you describe it? Jason.
Yes, it's no story. Unfortunately, it's no story, and it's my theory would be they take something in nature and convert to the political advice. Okay, and that's the story. If we are looking for the story, I would strongly recommend read the Zhuangzi. Okay, and the Zhuangzi have a full of a story, as many as Bible's story. So I think these two can be comparable.
Wonderful. So Kevin, how would you describe if Bible is full of stories? What would you say? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, when you read Dao De Jing, right, I would say you are artist. You draw a picture in your mind. You can see, you can make your own story. Let's see, each chapter have a little story, not a complete like a long story. You can fit in it. Like from they talk about the nature scene from wood, water, and in the winter you walk on ice. How right carefully, and everything. I would say that's so touching. Your own feeling. You have your own story in your heart. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Scott, Evanique, and Phil. Scott.
Hey, yeah. I feel like it sort of is kind of like a Poor Richard's almanac for kind of how to, as a way to rule people. I don't know. That's sort of I guess the type of knowledge that's contained within it.
Wonderful.
Yeah, that's it.
Thank you. Next up is Evanique, followed by Phil. Evanique.
Yeah, I would say there it's poetry. It's spiritual poetry, just like, and the Bible has stories, but it also has Psalms, and Psalms are poems. So I would say it's poetry about life, or about spiritual life.
Evanique, this is very odd. I actually agree with most of the things you're saying today. I don't know why, because I think the thing is that I have a context of kind of Indian religion, and I'm using that in order to understand this, and you're using Bible to understand it. And it's very similar because it's a kind of a similar way of coming at it. It's like looking at a parallel religion axis, and you're seeing the patterns. But definitely, it's definitely poetry, and it is full of metaphors. It uses natural things that you can observe in nature and makes kind of points about how you should be like nature from that. So instead of telling you a story about human beings acting, it is pointing you to things in nature and is saying, do like that. So it is kind of telling you stories by actually showing you nature, like a half full or overfull bowl of water, or muddy water, something like that. Wonderful. Next up is going to be Phil.
I would write a very beautiful haiku and have the courage to erase it entirely. But erase it so entirely that only way you could maybe have some trace of it is through some sort of X-ray, so that, because your presence should remain, but the content is not there. If you want me to tell you one of my favorite artworks, let me tell you, it's exactly about that.
Thank you, Phil.
You want me to tell you that story?
No, because the question is, what is Dao De Jing? What kind of a thing is it? That's the question.
Well, like I said, write a beautiful haiku, which are already reduced, but then erase it.
Wonderful. Next up is Brian.
I just wanted to mention what for me is a kind of a point behind the question. The Bible is stories and Tao is metaphor. I agree with that. The Bible is a story of God revealing himself in history, in events. And you kind of get into natural things when you talk about the creation of the earth, that the event that's described there is the beginning, the creation. And then very quickly you get into history, human history, and how God intervenes in human history. And the Tao is very different. I don't think there is, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but there's not the Tao intervening in human history the way God does in the Bible.
Thank you. So folks, what we're going to do is that I want to go through all the questions. So let's keep the answers short so we can go through everything. Next question is, I'm going to do two more questions. So first one is going to be, how do you communicate Tao to a world that is looking for answers? And then the last question is, how has encounter with Dao De Jing changed your life? Okay, so the first question is, how do you communicate it? Joe.
You kind of live it. That's the way you communicate it, is you live it, and then people hopefully all ask why you're tranquil. And so that's the end of that.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Anybody else? If not, we are going to go to the final question. And the final question is, how has the study of Dao De Jing changed your life? What difference has it made in your life? So I'll put it as a broad question. Kevin.
Oh, I almost asked the first question.
You can go ahead and answer the
first. Joe should be know better than me. How about Stoicism and Stoicism and Taoism? It's so similarity, I would say. For me, it's like a Western of side of Tao. It's a concept that maybe I didn't understand deep enough. And what's the second question, if you don't mind?
The second question is, how has study of Dao De Jing, how has it helped you?
I would say when you live so calm, if you see are not happy, watch the nature, see outside, then see your inside. You're so peacefully lively. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Next up is going to be Evanik, Joe, and Laura. Evanik.
Yeah, the studying the Tao has affected me profoundly in that I can remain calm in stressful situations. Whether it's work, whether it's home, whether it's what's going on outside, and it allows me to have the perspective of the spiritual, and realizing that I am not my work, I am not things that are outside of me, to kind of tap into who I am inside and try to reflect who I want to be on the outside.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next up is Joe, Laura, and Phil. Joe.
Yeah, I found that it's the perfect complement to my Stoicism. There's a lot of similarities, but where the distinction is, Stoicism, and you had spoken about this earlier this evening, the Stoicism will often put names to things and have a certain way of actually approaching a certain problem. Whereas the Tao is less like that, it's more in the metaphysical. And I think that what it does for me is it allows me to understand how the tranquility can come from the internal versus the external, versus the thinking. And so that's it really has been profound. Like Stoicism has changed, who I am, but the Tao complements it very nicely.
Wonderful. Thank you, Joe. Next up is going to be Laura, Phil, Brian, and Katie. Laura, how has the Dao De Jing helped you?
Well, I think there's the stoic side of me, and then there's this sort of abstract artist in me. And I think within that, it does allow me to, as Joe was saying, sort of have the answers. It allows me to blend those two parts of me and gives me the ability to find, to within it to find the answers myself, sort of like looking at the painting, the abstract painter has some purpose in saying something and has their way, whatever the painting means to them, but somebody else will see it in a different way. And I think that the Tao allows me to do that with my Stoic view. It opens it up for me.
Wonderful.
And a sense of peacefulness also.
Thank you, Laura. Next up is going to be Phil, Brian, Katie, Scott, and Judith. Phil.
Well, it has encouraged me to continue to try to walk this endless path.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next up is going to be Brian.
I think that I would emphasize the practice as it's in my life. And the practice as it's in my life right now is these meetups. So when I do the meetups, I get a lot out of it. And it's exactly along the lines that you all have identified, a sense of calm and letting the Tao flow through me or me flowing through the Tao. I wonder if I could maintain that though without these meetups. So I think for me right now, it's more of a beginner's practice than a big conclusive takeaway.
Yeah. So let me talk a little bit about what I'm getting from it and what I see it doing for the meetups. I think, firstly, we are getting into Chinese philosophy. China, you have to understand, China and India and West in order to begin to understand the world culture. So I think that's one part that part is huge. The secondly, it integrates with the Indian thought that I have or the Western thought that I have, whether it is the Bible or it is the Stoicism, it just integrates it very well. Thirdly, it very interestingly combines almost a secular view of nature with spirituality, deep spirituality. So it's deeply spiritual and completely consistent with science at the same time, in a way which is actually very unusual. So I think it has increased. The other thing that has happened is that it integrates with many of the ideas that we've been discussing, whether it is order and chaos in Jordan Peterson, whether it is the Holy Spirit in Bible on Thursdays, whether it is various themes of self-improvement that we are looking at. So it's been just amazing way of integrating many different things. So it's a profound work, and I think it is informing many things. And of course, I come from the Indian tradition, so many things like the meditation, the concept of Atma and Brahman are very close to the core ideas here. So I think they translate very, very well. So that's what I've gotten from it. Next up is going to be Brian, Scott, and Judith. Brian, not Brian, sorry, Katie.
So for me, I think it does a good job of capturing. I think Phil was talking about this earlier, just how big reality is and how big the universe is, and are trying to like grasp at the understanding of it. I think it does a good job of just capturing how big things are, versus like some other philosophies might be more like more sure of the way how things are. And I like how this captured just how large, how mysterious, and how we experience it but can't know. That's what I like about how it's explaining that.
Wonderful. Next up is Scott, followed by Judith. Scott.
Yeah, so I was brought up with my spirituality was kind of bound to my religion, and I don't think I really even knew that for a long period of my life. And as a result, you know, I ended up sacrificing some of my spirituality because of my struggles with religion. I have a lot of questions, and the concept of the Tao it's the only thing that I've found that completely disconnects my personal spirituality from any religion. And I'm even free to, you know, believe whatever religion I want along with it, and it still works. It's a very freeing thing for me in that way. So
that was wonderful comment, Scott. Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Last is Judith. Judith, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with Scott. I think it's just beautiful in that it can be reshaped. It's just so loose and flexible to reshape it in any way that works for the individual. And it's timeless that way. And so, you know, when we're busy in life trying to figure out answers and, you know, reading, you know, complicated philosophies or something, it just takes you down to the basics, and it's a quiet place where you're not fighting with ideas constantly. And interestingly, I'm sort of reading the Bhagavad Gita week by week, chapter by chapter. There are just so many names in Hindu or in that religion or whatever, in that philosophy. So it makes it really difficult. So the contrast, even though some ideas might have similarities because you can map them, but this concept of like, leave the naming of so many compartmentalization of different things a little bit alone, and just come back to where you're not trying to put definitions on every single thing. And it's peaceful and easy that way for simple minds like mine.
Yeah, no, Judith, that was an excellent comment. I think what it is actually pointing to is not just content, but it's a way of doing philosophy, of way of thinking, which is very different from that in the West or India. So I think that's another thing that we are getting from it. And, you know, I'm grateful to all of you folks, because no matter how much I try to study this, every time I come here and do these meetups, I learn so much more, because people come at it from so many different angles, add so much to the depth and richness, because each of us brings our own context and we share it very openly, and it just you know, throws different lights. So thank you so much. All right, thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Shrikant.
Well, thanks, Joe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All
yeah,
right.
no, I mean, you brought us all together and enabled us to share this. This has been one of those life-changing ones. So thank you.
Yeah, no, I think it's the chorus. You know, it's like there is a commonality of values that we all have. All of us are trying to kind of just explore this as deeply as we can, and we feel very comfortable kind of talking to each other. And I think that's it's something magical. You know, it's something magical. Wonderful. Thank you, everybody. See you soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you tomorrow.
See ya.
Bye.